Arnold Schwarzenegger is quite simply the best to ever do it. By it, I mean the action genre, starring in genre masterpieces both unheralded and otherwise, and leaving behind a truly unique screen presence and legacy in the process. There have been lows as well, but whether good or bad, Arnold is still unabashedly Arnold. So, I'm Ewan, this is What Culture, and here is every Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, ignoring uncredited cameos, ranked worst to best. Number 37. Hercules in New York. Schwarzenegger's acting career was almost over before it even started, with his debut, Hercules in New York, remaining his worst outing to date. Here, Arnold portrayed the hero of Greek legend as Zeus sends him to man's world. What should make for novel viewing a day at least is still pretty cringe-inducing, I'm afraid, with none of the humor landing and Arnie himself struggling with the dialogue. Number 36. The Villain. Another early career outing for Schwarzenegger, 1979's The Villain was a Kirk Douglas-led western comedy that had Arnold in the fittingly titled role of handsome stranger. The film itself is not good or really that funny, no matter how much it tries to channel the spirit of Chuck Jones's Roadrunner shorts, with Schwarzenegger also enabled to really show the charisma that would propel him to Hollywood summit in the following decade. Number 35. Iron Mask. The most upsetting thing about Iron Mask is that it brings together the two greatest action stars of all time, Jackie Chan and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and doesn't take the occasion seriously. Bonkers in premise, but tedious to sit through, the first on-screen meeting of Chan and Schwarzenegger should have been something that played to their respective strengths. Instead, it came in a weird fantasy adventure film that refuses to engage with either star's lofty legacies. Number 34. Killing Gunther. Killing Gunther, released in 2017, is the least ambitious of Schwarzenegger's films post-governorship comeback. A mockumentary centered around a team of experts who try to kill Schwarzenegger's eponymous assassin, the film boasts the occasional chuckle, but doesn't hold a candle to some of the other well-known genre mockumentaries of the last decade. It's got a fun premise, and Schwarzenegger is a delight as usual, getting to wear some fun outfits, but a heftier budget and a stronger supporting cast would have done it a huge favor. Number 33. Terminator Genesis. We should have all known that Terminator Genesis would be bad based on its stupidly spelled title alone. But hey, the return of Schwarzenegger to the franchise promised great things, and so we all showed up. And for his part, as is a running theme with even his lower tier works, he does really well with the material provided, slipping back into the metal endoskeleton for the first time since 2003's Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines. Where Genesis comes stuck is its messy plot, which relitigates the events of James Cameron's original film without providing a compelling reason as to why, and things only get more and more convoluted as it progresses. Truly the worst Terminator film to date, which is really saying something. Number 32. Aftermath. Probably the most frustrating of Schwarzenegger's recent efforts has to be 2017's Aftermath. The other dramatic role he took on alongside Maggie in the second part of the 2010s, Aftermath sees the actor in the role of a grieving father searching for answers after his wife and child die in a plane crash. This premise proves fertile for Schwarzenegger to spring compelling emotional shoots, but the execution is listless and plodding. Arnie is great at this stuff. It would just be nice to see him utilized in a more deserving project. Number 31. Stay Hungry. The second leading role Schwarzenegger took on, and a damn sight better than Hercules in New York, 1976's Stay Hungry is a weird oddity of a film. Arnie stars here as Joe Santo, a bodybuilder with aspirations of becoming Mr. Universe, just like the real deal. He's joined this time by a young Jeff Bridges, who plays a southern socialite who ends up befriending Santo and getting involved in the bodybuilding scene. It's a real head-scratcher tone-wise though, with 1977 documentary Pumping Iron ultimately doing a much better job of relaying the world Schwarzenegger inhabited during his days as an athlete. Number 30. Red Sonja. Jokingly referred to as a threat of punishment by Schwarzenegger to his own children, 1986's Red Sonja is not as diabolical as its reputation would lead you to believe, but it still isn't exactly a stellar entry in the actor's filmography. All the material was there to make a decent addition to the Conan series, this one's still pretty patchy compared to both Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer. Not Schwarzenegger's worst, and directed Richard Fleischer does provide a couple of enjoyable furnishings along the way, Way, but Sonya, and not Conan here because there was some weird copyright snafus going on, deserved a stronger adaptation. Number 29, Collateral Damage. A throwback to the kind of action film Schwarzenegger was making a decade before, 2002's Collateral Damage was directed by The Fugitive's Andrew Davis, but never once comes close to exhibiting the same kind of verve and momentum as that Harrison Ford starring masterpiece. Here, Schwarzenegger plays firefighter Captain Gordy Brewer, a man out for revenge against a Colombian drug ring whose attack on a consulate in Los Angeles resulted in the deaths of Brewer's wife and child. It's par for the course as far as early 2000s action films go, and while it's interesting to see Schwarzenegger take on more of a John McClane-esque character, he ultimately proves unsuited to, and poorly served by, the material in question. Number 28, The Sixth Day. Potentially the most forgotten of Arnie's immediate pre-governorship excursions, sci-fi actioner The Sixth Day was directed by Tomorrow Never Dies' Roger Spottiswoode and was a notable box office disappointment at the time of its release, all but confirming Schwarzenegger's then diminishing audience draw. Centered around a sinister clone conspiracy, sorry Spider-Man fans, that's trauma for you there, orchestrated by an evil tech CEO, the movie is surprisingly prescient in moments, but unremarkable on the whole. Number 27, Terminator Dark Fate. Terminator Dark Fate had plenty of promise, with Linda Hamilton returning as an aged Sarah Connor to do battle with the forces of Skynet once again. Sadly, like the preceding two sequels, Tim Miller's film got mired in the weeds of retroactive continuity, adding further insult to the injury inflicted by Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines by going back again to Terminator 2 Judgment Day and killing off John Connor. While unfortunate, the killing of Connor isn't what sinks Dark Fate. The film struggles to justify that opening gambit, but its biggest shortcomings emerge at a technical level. It simply isn't particularly interesting to look at, and while Hamilton and Schwarzenegger ooze gravitas, the action never rises to the occasion. Number 26, Maggie. Preceding Aftermath as one of two dramatic roles Schwarzenegger took in the latter half of the 2010s, Maggie saw the actor in the role of a father struggling to come to terms with the coming death of his daughter, the eponymous Maggie in question, portrayed by Abigail Breslin, following her infection in a zombie outbreak. Schwarzenegger takes to the material with ease, emanating sadness and regret to an affecting degree. It isn't exceptional as far as zombie dramas go, but it may leave you wishing that more studios sat up and took note of what he was accomplishing with this dramatic detour. Number 25, End of Days. End of Days isn't exactly what you'd call peak Arnold, coming just a few years before his run for governor, but it is quietly fascinating in that, while still rooted in the action genre, it's far bleaker than the actor's other efforts from the time. Directed by Peter Hyams, End of Days is dark, bleak, and typically apocalyptic, following in the footsteps of his existential 90s brethren by having Arnie unearth a satanic conspiracy that threatens to bring about Armageddon. Not typical fare for Schwarzenegger, but a competent and surprisingly atmospheric entry in his filmography all the same. Number 24, Sabotage. Of all the films Schwarzenegger has starred in following his return to acting, Sabotage might just be the strangest. Unexpectedly, this isn't your typical Arnold action film, with director David Ayer instead bringing all his nasty proclivities to the frame in what ends up being a gritty, gory, and totally aberrant example in Schwarzenegger's career, despite all of its action credentials. This isn't me saying that Sabotage is bad, but rather that its tone marks a huge contrast from most other Arnie movies. It's not particularly fun, everyone's an asshole, and Ayer revels in the guts and mud of it all as he would later do to more success with 2017's Fury. It's not a perfect formula, but Schwarzenegger at least takes to it with a real energy, mixing bravado with world weariness and, in turn, becoming the film's biggest highlight. Sabotage is grim and gross, and your mileage with it will probably vary based on what you want out of an Arnie movie. Even so, despite its bleakness, there remain glimmers of value. Number 23, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines is a film that really should not exist, with James Cameron's Terminator 2 Judgment Day so perfectly capping the entire story of Skynet off. However, Schwarzenegger had wanted to pursue a third Terminator for years by the time that Rise of the Machines was made, and as a sequel that exists just for the sake of it, it could honestly be a lot worse. The biggest criticism against Rise of the Machines is that it undoes the happy ending of Cameron's saga, concluding with the activation of Skynet and the commencement of nuclear Armageddon. It's a familiar story for a Cameron sequel, but while Alien 3 at least had the pageantry of David Fincher to fall back on, Rise of the Machines isn't so lucky. As it stands, it's a perfectly okay action film elevated by Schwarzenegger's presence and that of Kristanna Loken as the TX. Otherwise, it's pretty disposable. Number 22, Batman and Robin. Okay, I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this, but hear me out. Although there's no denying the fact it killed Batman on screen for about a decade, the reputation of Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin is way harsher than it deserves. Viewed through the lens of it being a neon-soaked update of the 60s TV show, it just about almost succeeds. Everything that was laudable about Batman Forever is dialed up to an almost obnoxious degree in Batman and Robin, with Schumacher famously remarking to his cast and crew that they were there to quote-unquote shoot a toy commercial. Look, I don't care what anyone else says, Schwarzenegger looks great as Mr. Freeze here, stogie in hand. The character then only recently off the heels of his reimagining in Batman animated series Heart of Ice, and he hams it up perfectly in the absence of any focused pathos. Had Schumacher dialed more into that element of the character, I kind of think Arnie would have nailed it even more. So yeah, Batman and Robin is not the abomination it's been made out to be, and also entirely worth it just for that Oscars 2024 bit with Danny DeVito and Michael Keaton. Number 21, Raw Deal. Contradicting its gorgeous looking poster by the great John Alvin, Raw Deal is maybe the most lethargic offering from Schwarzenegger's heyday, albeit one not without its fun moments. Here, Arnold portrays a small-town sheriff and former FBI agent out for revenge against a criminal outfit. Undercover shenanigans ensue, as slowly but surely, Schwarzenegger takes down the organization he's infiltrated. Sadly, director John Irvin doesn't really add much color to the proceedings. The film plays out in shades of brown and grey, while the action scenes themselves are shot in a stilted manner. It takes a lot to bury Schwarzenegger's charisma, but ultimately, Raw Deal does just that by saddling him with a humorless protagonist. It's not bad, but also, we know there's been much better. Number 20, Red Heat. Walter Hill was the granddaddy of the buddy cop genre. The writer and director kickstarted the entire trend with 48 Hours, the film that launched Eddie Murphy's film career and returned to the niche with 1988's Red Heat, a Cold War action comedy that paired a Soviet cop with a Chicago detective. The former role was inhabited by Arnold Schwarzenegger, while the latter was brought to life by James Belushi. While thoroughly watchable and replete with some all-timer Arnold moments, especially the cocaine bit, because that moment is legendary, Red Heat is no 48 Hours, with Hill deploying all the expected trappings of an East meets West story without the chemistry or action to mitigate the lack of invention. Ivan Danko is certainly one of Schwarzenegger's more memorable characters, and it's entertaining in a way you'd expect any 80s Arnie film to be, but Red Heat itself is far from his top tier. Number 19, Junior. Yeah, so not much needs to be said about Junior that little Arnold's face can't convey in this image, but let's give it a shot anyway. The third and arguably least successful collaboration between Schwarzenegger, DeVito, and director Ivan Reitman, Junior isn't quite as cursed as you may have been led to believe. In fact, like Twins and Kindergarten Cop, it's heartfelt in moments, and Schwarzenegger again shows that he's great at comedy. However, unlike those aforementioned films, it doesn't quite sustain its premise so well, with Schwarzenegger and DeVito's partnership lacking the same energy and charm that it did in Twins. Plus, you know, cursed Arnie baby. Kinda terrifying. Number 18, Escape Plan. Back in the 80s and 90s, the thought of Schwarzenegger teaming up with Sylvester Stallone would have probably conjured the most epic sounding movie ever. The duo were the action genre's two banner figures for much of those 2 decades, sharing an off-screen rivalry that drove each other to shoot for bigger, better, and often louder things on screen. Throw those 2 egos into one film, and the results should, at the very least, have been chaotic. Sadly, it took a bit too long for Sly and Arnie to lock horns in a film, and when it did happen, the results were pretty forgettable. 2013's Escape Plan marked the third of 4 movie meetings between the pair, all others of which came in the Expendables series, but it is the sole one dedicated to them as co-leads. While it functions fine as a low-stakes prison thriller, there's simply no excuse for it to be so grey and muted. What should have been a ballsy, daft meeting along the lines of what Stallone already accomplished with Kurt Russell in Tango and Cash instead plays out on autopilot, with Schwarzenegger and Sly straining against the confines of an unimaginative script and listless direction. It's fine, honestly it is, but they both deserve better than a rote prison plot and Jim Caviezel. Number 17. Conan the Destroyer. While not as fondly remembered as Conan the Barbarian, 1984's Conan the Destroyer is still plenty entertaining, upping the high fantasy elements and comedy compared to the previous outing and resulting in a vibrant but flawed adaptation of Robert E. Howard's comics. Worth watching for the pairing of Grace Jones and Schwarzenegger alone, but comics fans will also glean value from the knowledge that Marvel scribes Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas wrote the story, one that producer Dino De Laurentiis sadly undermined, but even with that baggage in tow, there's still plenty to like about the finished product. Number 16. The Expendables 3. The Expendables 3 gets a harsher rap than it arguably deserves, though there's no disputing that Sylvester Stallone made a huge mistake in trying to usher in a quote-unquote new generation of action stars with its story, as well as appeal to a wider audience by mellowing out the action. Seriously, Sly, we want the squibs. Gimme, 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 more squibs. The third Expendables film remains the sole entry in the franchise to be given a PG-13 rating, and while it finds redemption in the additions of Antonio Banderas and Wesley Snipes, that rating unfortunately continues to hang around its neck like a big old albatross. Schwarzenegger does at least benefit from a slightly beefier role this time, assembling the remnants of Barney Ross's team to go get him out of the bind. Particularly fun are his exchanges with Jet Li's Yang, and for a time, especially in the film's entertaining climax, it really does feel like the film is delivering on the series' premise. The bad part is, there's also a lot of chaff to sift through to get there. Number 15. Eraser. The forgotten child of Schwarzenegger's mid to late 90s era, Chuck Russell's Eraser is a no-frills throwback to the actor's earlier action films, with one or two welcome tricks up its sleeve, one of whom is James Caan, who I will always appreciate showing up in literally anything. More famous for pitting Arnie against a wayward alligator than anything else, the film is unremarkable and yet thoroughly watchable, elevated by the performances of Schwarzenegger and co-lead Vanessa Williams, as well as Russell's direction, which exhibits much the same colour and flair that made his 1994 movie The Mask such a hit. Number 14. The Last Stand. If Sabotage is one of Arnold's less crowd-pleasing post-governorship jaunts, then The Last Stand is the exact opposite. A nice, pleasant return to leading man status, wherein he plays a small-town sheriff forced to take on a drug lord fugitive and his band of cartel cronies. Kim Ji-woon's film is fast and functional, while Arnold himself seems to be relishing his homecoming event, playing with his age and finding his footing as an action lead once more. It's not quite as expansive or as ceremonious as it arguably should have been, but The Last Stand still succeeds by bringing some always appreciated neo-western vibes to the table, and matching Schwarzenegger with a solid cast of supporting players. Number 13. Jingle All The Way. Once considered one of the low points of Schwarzenegger's pivot to comedy, Jingle All The Way is today something of a festive cult favourite. That evolution should in no small part be credited directly to Arnie himself, whose unique screen presence elevates what could have otherwise been a generic holiday cartoon. Its appeal lies in the fact that Arnold, and let's be honest here, doesn't really belong in the scenario. He is simply too larger than life to play the part of an absent-minded middle-class dad. And yet, it's something that Jingle All The Way is all too aware of, as it constructs elaborate action-esque scenarios for Schwarzenegger's character, Howard Langston, to get caught up in. There's a cringe-inducing mall chase, a fight with a reindeer, and even a superhero battle to cap things off. It's dumb, it's nakedly cynical, but even so, there's something admirable in how the film offers no illusions about what Christmas has morphed into. Is it sad that holiday traditions can be boiled down to buy me Turbo Man or go to hell? Well, yeah, but that's kind of how it's been for a good long while now. The secret here is that it's better to just give in and embrace the chaos, which is also, coincidentally, the best way of enjoying Jingle All The Way. Number 12. The Expendables 2. While Schwarzenegger did appear in the first Expendables film in 2010, it was only in a cameo and thus not eligible for ranking. For what it's worth, the first Expendables is a perfectly acceptable piece of action cinema. It just failed to accomplish its main mission, that being to assemble an all-star cast of action legends in one film. Thankfully, the sequel delivered a much more competent and rousing adventure, not only upping the size of the cast to accommodate genre legends like Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme, but actually utilizing them in fun and at times exciting ways. Schwarzenegger, then fresh off leaving the California governorship in 2011, also had his role as rival mercenary Trench upgraded, getting to flex his action chops probably for the first time in almost a decade. The novelty of seeing Arnold trade barbs and bullets with old-time rival Sylvester Stallone and fellow genre legend Bruce Willis simply does not get old, and while his role is marginal compared to Sly's, it's substantial enough to leave an impact. The Expendables films themselves might not be on the level of what these guys accomplished decades ago, but the second entry certainly had its moments. Number 11. Kindergarten Cop. The second of 3 collaborations with Ivan Reitman, 1990's Kindergarten Cop was another opportunity for Schwarzenegger to mix action with comedy, this time taking on the role of a hard-boiled detective, John Kimball, who was forced to go undercover at a kindergarten in hopes of taking down a drug dealer played by Richard Tyson. While nowhere near as great as Reitman and Schwarzenegger's first meeting, Kindergarten Cop is still a charming outing for the duo, one that delivers plenty of great one-liners and quotes as Kimball tries to wrangle his kindergarten class and balance his duties as a policeman and replacement teacher. Certainly not the high point of the actor's pivot to comedy, but still really entertaining when it counts. Number 10. Conan the Barbarian. The Terminator may have cemented Arnold Schwarzenegger as an acting phenomenon, but it was John Milius's Conan the Barbarian that showed the world for the first time just how unique a screen presence he was. The first of several Schwarzenegger starring adaptations of Robert E. Howard's high fantasy Conan stories, Milius's film is fierce and brilliantly realized, relaying the story of Conan's rise to legend and his quest to avenge the death of his family at the hands of Tools of Doom, played brilliantly by James Earl Jones. Along the way, he meets 3 notable allies: Sabotage, played by Jerry Lopez, a thief and an archer; Valeria, portrayed by Sandal Bergman, a fellow warrior who becomes Conan's lover; and Akiro the Wizard, played by Mako, a mystic who also delivers the film's immortal ending narration. While far from perfect, Schwarzenegger's first leading role remains one of his most iconic, transfixed in a visually rich and suitably violent translation of Howard's comics. Fingers crossed that, as per the actor's own wishes, an Old Man Conan film may materialize in the coming years. Number 9. Commando. One need only listen to the ridiculous genius that is James Horner's score for Commando to get a sense of just how brilliantly fun the movie actually is. A bouncy hodgepodge of steel drums, synth, and then out of nowhere a saxophone, because why not, Horner's theme is the perfect embodiment of Schwarzenegger's most brand-reflective action film, which remains to this day one of the actor's most enduring. Directed by Mark L. Lester and written by 80s and 90s genre fixture Stephen E. D'Souza, Commando was, in many ways, the film that cemented Schwarzenegger's action bona fides. Conan and the Terminator had come before, yeah, but this was the film that established brand Arnold. Boisterous, endlessly quotable, and completely and utterly devoted to centering Schwarzenegger's whirlwind physicality. It isn't as technically proficient as many of the other films Schwarzenegger would star in afterwards, but it really remains a touchstone of 80s action cinema. Number 8. The Running Man. As sci-fi satire, Paul Michael Glaze's The Running Man is weirdly prescient. As a colourfully pulpy action romp, it succeeds tenfold. Set in the near future, where the United States has elected an authoritarian and fascist government, The Running Man sees Schwarzenegger as Captain Ben Richards, a helicopter pilot who attempts to prevent a police-sanctioned massacre of civilians and is thusly accused of their killings as the authorities attempt to cover up. In this future though, criminals are entered into the Running Man competition, a televised gladiators-inspired bloodsport TV show that usually results in their execution. Richard's name may not be Schwarzenegger's most memorable, but the iconography of the Running Man, especially the actor in that yellow quilted jumpsuit, is among the more striking in his filmography. It also doubles as a strong Stephen King adaptation, which is a neat little bonus too. Number 7. Twins. Someone needs to say it. Twins does not get the credit it deserves. While a huge success at the 1988 box office and still fondly remembered, Ivan Reitman's Schwarzenegger Danny DeVito starring comedy isn't simply a good movie, but a great one. Full of heart, laughs, and a real zest and colour, Reitman ensures that Twins never succumbs to the novelty of its premise, allowing plenty of room for DeVito to scamp it up as Vincent Benedict and for Schwarzenegger to riff on his action persona by playing a gentle giant Julius who is unwise to the world and yet full of sage advice. In the process, Reitman's film ends up arriving at salient yet wholesome conclusions pertaining to nature and nurture, family, and romance. Like Vincent and Julius together, it's the complete package, an effortlessly breezy comfort watch that illustrates Arnold's comedic chops and sense of screen presence with aplomb. As the peaceful and learned Julius, Schwarzenegger is free to poke fun at his action persona. Actually, I hate violence, but never in a way that comes across as gimmicky. Reitman leaves these brief riffs to the early stages of the film, enabling Schwarzenegger to embrace Julius's earnest ways and match DeVito beat for beat. The peak of which comes in Twins' grin-inducing matching suit scene, which just makes my day every time I see it. All in all, it's just the best time. Schwarzenegger and DeVito are a perfect duo, backed up all the way by the brilliant Chloe Webb and Kelly Preston as sisters Linda and Marnie respectively. Gorgeous, charming viewing from one of the 80s great comedy masters. Number 6. True Lies. True Lies is a testament to how far one man will go to gas up their ride or die, with director James Cameron devoting every other frame of his 1994 action comedy blockbuster to reminding us all just how cool and unique a screen presence Arnold Schwarzenegger truly is. A comeback moment for the actor, as much as it was a false dawn for a post-Last Action Hero resurgence, True Lies is every bit the spirited all-out adventure you'd expect from a Cameron blockbuster, albeit one not without some flaws. Based upon a French film called La Totale, True Lies centered around Schwarzenegger as Harry Tasker, a spy for an ultra-secret US agency who has kept his life a complete secret from his wife Helen, embodied brilliantly by Jamie Lee Curtis. As his double life leads to a marriage crisis, Harry has to save his relationship and the United States at the same time, resulting in some great interplay between the two actors, as well as some of Cameron's most breathtaking action sequences to date. Where True Lies stumbles is, ironically, in its lack of balance. Harry's suspicions of Helen's infidelity lead to an investigation involving the man she's seeing, Simon, played by a gloriously mustachioed Bill Paxton, and it's a detour that stymies the up until then brisk pace of the story. Cameron eventually reconciles these two converging narratives once Harry's double life is revealed to Helen, leading to the resumption of normal programming, in this case Arnold hosing down terrorists with an improvised flamethrower, but it stands out like an awkward filling sandwich between a brilliant second and third act. Then there are the movie's villains, who are essentially just bland terrorist caricatures for Arnie to shoot his way through. Schwarzenegger has tangled with far better over the years, and it remains True Lies' biggest shame that it's so unimaginative in this particular department. Neither of these issues prove enough to derail the film, of course, which remains one of Schwarzenegger's absolute best. With plenty of great action and a comedic sincerity only Arnold could embody, True Lies is a true action spectacle. A gloriously self-indulgent offering that will have you punch in the air with glee that someone gave James Cameron access to 2 Harrier jump jets. Seriously, God bless that person. Number 5. Total Recall. Paul Verhoeven and Arnold Schwarzenegger were a match made in heaven. The former's maximalist satirical tendencies aligned perfectly with the larger-than-life aura of the latter, with their coming together resulting on the all-time great science fiction action films. 1990's Total Recall. Based on a story by Philip K. Dick, Verhoeven's film is a vibrant, humorous, and spirited offering that, while not quite on the same level as his masterpiece RoboCop, nevertheless displayed the same qualities that made that film such a resounding success, satirizing the banality of capitalism and the futility of escape. Total Recall also provided Schwarzenegger with ample room to stretch his acting chops, taking on the dual roles of Doug Quaid and Carl Hauser, a man either reliving a memory-wiped past and reclaiming his destiny, or one who is just fulfilling the transactional escape he had always been hoping for, depending on your interpretation. Whichever way you slice Total Recall's ending though, it remains a high point for both Verhoeven and Schwarzenegger, the latter re-entering a similar satirical slice of sci-fi that he excelled in with The Running Man. Total Recall is less rough around the edges than that effort though, bolstered by formidable actors like Michael Ironside and Sharon Stone, as well as Verhoeven's exacting and cutting sense of humor. Number 4. Last Action Hero. In a just world, Last Action Hero would never have been the flop it was when it premiered in 1993. Crushed by the weight of Brand Arnold and a little old movie called Jurassic Park, John McTiernan's underappreciated action send-up and send-off was dead on arrival, plagued by a chaotic production and criticized for self-indulgence, tonal inconsistency, and studio arrogance. While the latter charge is fair enough, I mean, seriously, against Jurassic Park, Columbia? Last Action Hero remains Schwarzenegger and McTiernan's most underrated effort, a deeply introspective work of action brilliance that served as a post-mortem on the genre's 80s explosion, and on Schwarzenegger's then unshakable screen legacy. These qualities have always been a part of McTiernan's film, which transcended its irreverent parody roots to become something altogether more sincere, heartfelt, and considered. The diagnosis for Last Action Hero's failure has long rested with the idea that its genre mockery was toothless. Brought together as it was by figures synonymous with action's box office dominance, who then had too much affection for it to rib it effectively. In actual fact, this very heart has always been the film's biggest weapon. Last Action Hero, and Schwarzenegger for that matter, is more conscious than anyone of the restorative power of cinema and the lines between escape and reality. Here, Arnold and McTiernan reconcile myth with reality, celebrity with vulnerability, and artifice with authenticity, pairing the monument-like Arnold with young Austin O'Brien, who plays a fatherless child who fills that void with the movies. For Schwarzenegger, whose own journey was sparked by childhood inspirations like Reg Park and John Wayne, it serves as a poignant moment of reflection. An indulgent one, maybe, but one no less earned. In any case, Last Action Hero balances its myriad and at times contradictory features remarkably well. It's one of McTiernan's most beautiful movies, features a ton of great action, an iconic turn from Charles Dance, and is legitimately funny. It's just a film that, unfortunately, had the odds stacked against it from the beginning. Number 3. The Terminator. Given it was the first collaboration between Cameron and Schwarzenegger, it's remarkable just how fully formed and authoritative 1984's The Terminator actually is. Fresh off the heels of helming Piranha 2: The Spawning, The Terminator signaled the arrival of Cameron as a force in science fiction, with the director following his tech-noir thriller with seminal genre efforts Aliens: The Abyss and Terminator 2: Judgment Day, which we'll get to later. It also intimated the unique screen presence and versatility of Schwarzenegger in a flash, with the actor making an effortless transition from mythic fantasy hero in Conan to what was, in essence, a robotic slasher villain. The Austrian had initially been optioned for the part of Kyle Reese, the kind of role that would become his bread and butter in later years, with Lance Henriksen the first choice as the T-800. However, fate intervened, and after a meeting between the duo, Cameron decided that Schwarzenegger should be the Terminator instead. It remains one of the most consequential casting decisions of all time. The Terminator made Arnie a phenomenon. His inimitable physicality, which Cameron instantly tapped into, now married with a then unseen range. Suddenly, he was no longer just a novelty. These qualities may have been conveyed by Milius in Conan the Barbarian, but the Terminator enshrined the modern myth of Arnold, from which flowed his amazing action legacy. Of course, off-screen narratives alone aren't what makes The Terminator one of the greatest Schwarzenegger films. It's a remarkable piece of cinema, as technically proficient as it is tense, romantic, and apocalyptically harrowing. Not just one of the best films of Arnold's career, but, like the following entries, one of the greatest, full stop. Number 2. Terminator 2: Judgment Day. Terminator 2 Judgment Day is the apex of Arnold as an actor and as a star, the culmination of a decade of genre dominance that subverted his mainstream debut and yielded Schwarzenegger's most heartfelt and emotional performance to date. Undoubtedly one of the greatest action movies, sci-fi movies, and sequels ever made, James Cameron's Terminator follow-up recalibrated an 80s cinema icon, turning one of the decade's greatest villains into the next one's hero. And while T2 is filled to the brim with immaculate players, including a career-best Linda Hamilton, who marshals her own on-screen transformation just as shockingly and believably as Schwarzenegger, Arnold is its beating mechanical heart and soul, a death robot who is taught to love and live by a troubled boy whose shoulders the weight of the world has been placed. Cameron orchestrates the character's reintroduction and development perfectly, first playing with the expectation of the T-800's previous appearance and the arrival of Robert Patrick's cop-dressed T-1000, before slowly developing the emotional connection between the machine and John Connor, in and amongst some of the best action sequences of the decade. Slowly but surely, the Terminator becomes a reflection of humanity's best features, showing mercy, cracking jokes, and cementing an emotional bond with his protectee. Cameron builds this to a fittingly devastating conclusion, which in turn delivers the most affecting moments of screen time in Schwarzenegger's filmography, as the T-800 lays itself to rest and parts ways with his surrogate family. Out of tragedy springs hope, but the Terminator's loss is one of cinema's most profound. So well oiled is Cameron's direction and committed Schwarzenegger's performance. And number 1, Predator. Predator is the greatest action film ever made, and one that, like Arnold, feels underestimated even with its undisputed place in the genre canon. It was the film that announced John McTiernan into the world, but also a new era for Schwarzenegger. With his action bona fides then well and truly cemented, Predator afforded a space for Arnold to subvert genre tropes and play with his physicality in a considered manner, rubbishing the notion of his perceived on-screen invulnerability in a genre-bending effort just as smart and gripping as Cameron's Terminator. And McTiernan's follow-up Die Hard as well. The genius of Predator lies in its interrogation of genre. While McTiernan would earn these plaudits on Die Hard for casting a lean and vulnerable Bruce Willis as New York cop John McClane, Predator, stacked to the gills with athletes and larger-than-life personalities, was no less introspective when it released in 1987. Its cast of immaculate badasses, headed up by Schwarzenegger and the late, great Carl Weathers, enter the film with typical explosiveness, sharing arm shakes, trading macho dialogue, and laying waste to a compound of generically armed rebels with puns and squibs aplenty. And then they are picked off, one by the 7-foot Predator, a slasher villain from outside our solar system who, like Arnold in previous epic Commando, eats Green Berets for breakfast. In and amongst this genre interrogation is subtext on America's Latin American misadventures, the war on drugs and the Iran-Contra affair then at the forefront of the news cycle, and also just a rollicking good story. A Sergeant Rock-adjacent sci-fi horror that fully understood Schwarzenegger's strengths and birthed what is, in my view, his most definitive performance. In short, Predator is Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's his strength, his humor, his sheer stogie-smoking force of personality. Better individual performances there may have been, but none exemplify brand Arnold like McTiernan's masterpiece.